to please stay on for our next session on SPY learning curve. Fluorescence imaging in oncology, a case discussion. The speakers for this session are Dr. T.S. Rao from Basavatarakam Indo-American Cancer Institute, Hyderabad. Dr. Sandeep Nayak from Fortis Cancer Institute, Bengaluru. This session will be moderated by Dr. Karthik Chandra from Apollo Cancer Hospitals, Visakhapatnam. Over to you, Dr. Chandra.
Okay, once again, a warm welcome to all of you. So the next session is on the learning curve in surgical oncology for all surgeons for that matter. So it is well known for any surgeon. See, if he says that I'm the master of this surgery and I don't have anything to learn, then he's probably not a really great surgeon. So the learning curve never ends in surgery. And more importantly, for any budding surgeon, it is essential to know that we have to learn not just from our mistakes. A smart surgeon or a smart person learns from others' mistakes, and that's how the learning curve is overcome. So definitely, we have two stalwarts here who have been practicing fluorescence guided surgery for quite some time, and any new technology for this matter will have some pitfalls. It will have its own learning curve. There will be a lot of technical issues in the beginning. Even the supporting staff from the company itself may not be really aware of some of the potential users or potential problems with the technology. And it is essential for us to know how to overcome these problems. And that's why I really appreciate the company to introduce this session in this conference, because that will really help us, like people like me who are starting off using this system will be really helped by this session. So Dr. T.S. Rao sir is the first speaker and he needs no introduction. He's just let me suffice by saying he's a legend in terms of teaching and inspiring the new generation of oncosurgeons. Sir, please give your tell us about your experience with the starting of this technology, implementing this.
Thank you very much, Karthik, and good evening, Sandeep. Once again, good to be with both of you. Both of you are real stars already, and I really see a very bright future for you and bright future for oncology under your stewardship. Now, basically, I'll introduce what actually learning and learning curve means so that Karthik can take it forward after that. A few examples only, I won't waste much time because I know this session belongs to Karthik predominantly. Surgery and learning curve are something that are discussed, and it needs to be discussed because it's indeed a great responsibility of the student and the consultant and the system itself, because unless someone can flatten this learning curve, there is a patient at the end of your knife. So that is something that you must understand. So if the learning curve is long, there is morbidity that is being added to the patient. So to become an expert from a novice, the curve should not be too steep. So that is the aim of training pathways and training processes, and this CME itself is something in that direction. As the technology is evolving, what it actually does is it actually flattens the learning curve. There is a sudden improvement in the learning curve. So the overall time that is taken or the number of procedures that are necessary comes down significantly. I started practice and service while there were absolutely nothing called YouTube videos. I had about 20 anatomy books. Every anatomy book in the world is something that I had a hard copy of. And any new procedure that I had to do, I would read anatomy thoroughly, go there and try to unravel anatomy and remove what needs to be removed and keep what needs to be kept. The younger ones these days are much luckier because of YouTube and various other platforms, wherein you see the procedure very clearly in HD 4K formats, 3D formats, and then automatically see, which means you're not actually performing for the first time. You are trying to rehearse and then go and relive the whole experience. So videos actually decrease the learning curve significantly. So what is all this leading to? Preoperative planning on the platforms and international collaborations bring down the learning curve, and then the intraoperative telementoring is something that works wonderfully well, and then the postoperative coaching that happens in the institute. There are the Indo-American Hospital boasts of a 50-member surgical team. All of them are very cohesive, speak in one word, and we sit together. Every second of our work is recorded and reviewed by seniors and the other consultants and the residents to understand what was actually wrong, if something has happened, or if a resident has operated, the consultant reviews everything and then corrects the mistakes. So are small flaws that happen that delay the procedure or lead to fatigue during the procedure. So post-operative coaching is also something that can decrease the learning curve and make the next procedure much more safer. So eventually the surgeon, the leader, is in a perpetual learning. What happens here is you are continuously learning to actually perform better, and this increases much more. So your life cycle is, you are an expert, all right, expert in certain areas only. There are new avenues that are opening up which will make you a learner again, and that's what the fluorescence imaging has actually done to me. That's what minimal access has done to me. So the new curve is what is called the MBS curve, a mathematical model described by AT-MBS. It's spelled as Mobius, but pronounced as MBS, wherein if you start at one point, unless you go twice, like an infinity, you cannot reach the same point. So this is called the infinity curve or the MBS curve, wherein you are discussing learning, unlearning, and relearning, and stressing the fact that you are a perpetual learner. So what is said is the term perpetual learner has been thrown around a lot recently, and while it is important to learn how to learn in today's fast pace of change, the concept is not something new. We have always been, at least in the medical specialties, we have always had to adapt throughout history. But the difference is now we have to be super perpetual learners because of rapid expansion of technology and technique, both of them. So the phases will be learning and growth are explicitly codified values. Teaching and learning are on everyday part of work. Infrastructure to support learning from daily work. That is where companies, multinational companies like Stryker comes in to make us understand the new curve. They bring in new technology, new machines, which are eventually including artificial intelligence. So which means we need to bend our natural intelligence to make the best use of this artificial intelligence. So for an oncology mentor or a student, open surgical skills, then the MAS skills, we have to unlearn and relearn. Now fluorescence imaging, sentinel techniques, reconstructive skills, and the allied knowledge also becomes important. So eventually you are continuously learning. A few examples. This is initial hurdles that we have seen with the 1688, because we didn't understand the technology, despite the fact that we did a few workshops wherein everything was taught. Spills like this can completely spoil the procedure. Once there is a significant spill and something that gets onto the mop and the gauze piece, the central node identification becomes extremely difficult. It's all stars in the sky, and you won't find the actual star. On the right side, it is melanoma, and the whole leg takes up the dye. And if you try to see it with the camera, the actual node cannot be identified. So it's important to understand that the machine has to be learned. The methods also have to be learned. Spills happen even in thoracic duct identification. A thin needle goes in. And then what is important is to inject a small quantity of the dye. And you don't want it to injure the vessel that is underneath. You're anxious that you will be hitting a vessel and it can form a hematoma with unnecessary morbidity. So that anxiety makes you stay superficial just into the peritoneum. So it can lead to very significant spill. And initial days we were also worried that the dose is not enough. We would not know that a very small amount of ICG is enough for you to produce the desired results. You can actually see that a lot of spillage makes this procedure, at least for this patient, absolutely worthless. So that is something that we have learned. A submental flap being done by our head and neck team, they were very confident and comfortable with the clinical element of it. But when they saw it on this, they were expecting it to become really green. Not too much of literature to support it, prove or disprove anything here. So you can actually see the anxiety of the head and neck surgeon there. Was really worried. Hitherto he was not worried with many of his flaps. Same thing on the right side. What happened here is, with the background of the muscle and the vessel, it looks darker. So what is important is to place it on a mop. Now suddenly, and when you go very close to it, you understand that most of the flap is quite vascular. It was actually bleeding from the edge, but the technology shows it as a darker one. If you don't follow a protocol, you don't follow the depth of what has to be done. You don't actually bother about the detail of the method of doing it. And then the systems also evolved. We bought the ICG system about in 2014 actually. Struggled initially because it was all seen in blue initially. Software adjustments needed. Never understood that colors really matter. What is the problem even if it is blue? We thought, but realized that once there was a software setting that was done, when it was green, it was much better to the eye, and sentinel nodes were much better seen. The second generation, once there was a software update that came into the market, so we went for it and understood that it was definitely better, and we could do this. Although we needed to swap between the white light and the near infrared light. Same thing on the right side, a para-aortic lymphadenectomy in progress, sentinel node done. Because we didn't standardize the technique, we were doing a para-aortic lymphadenectomy and a pelvic lymphadenectomy for all these patients. So that actually glorifies the overlay advantage that has come into the market, and we bought this early, and there was no stopping after this. You can actually see and operate while it is in the overlay mode. So you can see the vessels with the white light, you can see the lymph node and the lymphatics in the infrared light. So this is something that is a breakthrough in technology of fluorescent imaging. It's very exciting as far as technology and technique is concerned. Makes things so much more easier. There's no fatigue. You're not using your foot to guide your surgery. You're not worried that you may hit a vessel in the NIFR mode, or you may miss a small part of the node in the white light mode. So everything is sorted out. In the initial systems, we used it for ileocolic transposition. We do lots of right colons for corrosive strictures while I worked in Asian Institute of Gastroenterology also. So here, it's so difficult to understand how green is green. Roy Patankar keeps talking about how green is green. How do we understand? There are various shades of green. If you don't have the other modes, you would understand that you are actually handicapped for and you cannot decide easily. You can see the first video wherein you need to go very close in a dark environment, open your eyes and peep into the structure. There is no monitor to actually show you. The picture-in-picture shows how it is being done from outside. You need to really take the camera very, very close to understand whether it's vascular or not. And there are various hues of green. We would use it for a while and then we stopped using it because it was not comfortable to the eye. When we acquired this, things became much easier. You can actually see in the white light the actual stomach tube, and then it's filling up sequentially, the first blush, the second blush, and the no-fill stomach fundus. Very elegant technology, makes you feel good and confident. And we were working because we started doing this about 1.5 years back. We didn't know which way to inject, so we tried various things: the web space of the toes, the groin subcutaneous bilaterally, and then the small bowel. Only to understand that our initial aim was to identify the thoracic duct, because there are lots of trainees. And it's not always easy to convince a trainee where the thoracic duct actually lies, because you don't see it through the pleura, at least in some patients. In obese patients, in patients with a spine that is projecting into the chest, it becomes much more difficult to actually convince the youngster where the thoracic duct is. So we wanted to identify it, and because of the volumes of esophageal surgery and the training, the robust training that happens in the institute, we wanted to work on this. So we did this in multiple patients, only to understand that thoracic duct was never glowing enough for our comfort. Multiple times, 10, 12 patients we tried, and then started reading the literature and understood that there was one group which started doing it into the inguinal nodes. I thought, without the radiologist's help, that is our esophageal surgeon Syed Nusrat doing it. So not the radiologist, he's a surgical oncologist. So I realized that identifying a node and injecting into its capsule is not difficult. You can see this video that the dye actually is filling, the flush into the dye is filling the node, and in no time it actually reaches the thoracic duct. So from that day, I think we never looked back. Each thoracic duct was seen from the hiatus to the neck, root of the neck. Learning curve has been bent to an infinity curve. Surgeons don't seem to have a choice but to relearn. And these days, you cannot say somebody is a learner and somebody is not a learner. Everybody should learn. If you are not learning, which means you are not evolving, you are not doing enough, or you would only burn yourself out and become a part of history if you don't learn. What is important is to handle dye also well. It's not just the images that you look at, but every step has to be done very, very carefully to avoid spills, because that can spoil the entire procedure. and the foreground has to be isolated carefully. You must understand the different systems and invest carefully. Invest in a versatile system wherein all modes are there, and then it can invest in a place where multiple surgeons can use it, so that it becomes cost effective. The uses of fluorescence, you should only stretch your imaginations. Imagine your imagination is the horizon, your imagination is the limit to continue to evolve and ensure safer surgeries. I think ICG would play a major role in future. Thank you, Karthik.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your really valuable insights into this learning curve associated with fluorescence technology, and expanding the horizons forward. I want to ask the initial experience with Dr. Nayak. Dr. Nayak, is that your screen? Something else is coming on the screen. Is it your screen, sir?
I don't know whether I have. You cannot start. No, not my screen. It's not shared.
Okay. So before you share your screen, I just want to ask, what's your because sentinel node biopsy is an important component of oncology learning, surgical oncology. What is your experience vis-a-vis when comparing radiocolloid dye versus ICG for sentinel node biopsy? Like, how do you compare, and what is your comfort level with using either of these?
See, initially it was difficult to switch over because we were used to blue dye plus the radioisotope. It's just that, we are used to two different modalities. Like, one is a visual one, other one is something which is, probe based. But when we had to switch over from that to two technologies which are totally vision based, there was some amount of readjustment that had to take place, especially for breast and these things. It was an adjustment thing. We also had a lot of smudging. We had difficulties. In fact, the same scenario when Dr. Rao was showing, where the entire breast was bright in color, bright green in color. We faced that many times in the one or two cases in the beginning, and then after that we learned that we were injecting too much, for a simple reason that we had tried out some other system, and that system needed more dye than this one, so we had to relearn the entire thing. As sir was telling, we had to it's a system which is more important. You have to, so if you switch from this one to another company, the entire way it is done will change. So that's what we are facing, and we finally learned how to use this. And it's just like, you getting used to your car. It's as simple as that. So you have to learn the process and, make sure that what you do in this particular, using this particular technology is correct. That's what it's.
So that is one thing which I heard from other people who have started off using the ICG technique recently. So that the dye travels really fast. Yeah. And sometimes some of the surgeons are advising to take the incision and keep it ready before injecting the dye. So is that something which you're following? I mean, what you're doing? For example, for a mastectomy, if you have to do, what do you do? I mean,
for breast, we don't do that. Okay. In fact, we inject the blue dye first, then wait for about 15 minutes, and then we inject for indocyanine green, and then immediately start with the surgery. So as we start opening the axilla, we track the dye going into the breast, axilla.
So first you open the axilla first, while raising the skin flaps, because the dye will travel really fast, no? The ICG
not that fast, not so much. Okay. See, we can see the dye passing into the axilla, we can track it. In fact, it's not that fast. Okay. It takes about 2 to 3 minutes, but it remains in the nodes. See, okay. It is not going to pass through the node so rapidly.
Okay.
Node is going to retain it for some time. So very often, whenever my team does it, I have seen, they wait for the dye to reach the axillary fold, anterior axillary fold, then they put the incision.
Okay.
So they don't do it before that. It's not necessary. It's not that rapid.
No, I'm asking for a mastectomy. For a mastectomy, what would you do?
Mastectomy also same thing. We wait for the dye to reach the axillary fold, anterior axillary fold, then put the anterior superior incision and extend the same incision into the axilla and then do it. We don't place the incision before for a simple reason that you may end up transecting the ducts. Okay. How do you know you're not transected the ducts? How superficial they are running? So we don't put the best.
Yes. Great. So
I don't think.
So you,
Karthik.
Yes, sir.
I don't think you need to be in such a big hurry. I think Sandeep has a point. You inject and then continue to work.
Okay.
It should not be a serious problem.
Yeah. Okay.
Not a emergency.
Because your node is going to retain the dye for some time. It's not going to go away from the node.
Correct.
If that is the idea, then pass through will happen. No, so it is not going to happen like that. The idea is that the molecular size of these molecules like methylene blue or indocyanine green is such that they don't pass through the lymph node so rapidly. That is the idea of giving it.
Fine. So far we have heard about like sentinel node biopsy being established in various cancers. So we should talk a bit more about the morbidity, how to decrease morbidity using this technology. So something that is important is intestinal vascularity. So you have some videos on intestinal vascularity, ensuring a safe anastomosis, sir?
Shall I?
Yeah, please share.
Yeah, they have allowed me to share. Okay, fine. So where is that? Give me a moment. So you can see the slides?
Yes.
Just a minute. Yeah. So, I thought, I knew Subbu sir will present some good, things which are very interesting and very innovative, and his experience is always interesting. So I always sit and watch what he presents. So very nice presentation. After his presentation, my presentation will be a little bit placid. But let me just talk about some of the things which I have learned. So my idea was to present to you what I learned, what I am learning, and what I am trying to learn. So the three aspects of what is going on is what I would like to show. First thing is, about the colonic conduit for the rectal anastomosis. In fact, this is something which has been very often projected. And for now, the first few things which when we started doing, this is what we did. We got out the colonic entire conduit. We saw what is happening and then injected the dye. We saw this. We saw nice vascularity, all green. You saw the blush appearing, first blush, second blush. So we transected at the line of, where it was green, because we wanted to save the sufficient length of, colon, and we anastomosed. It worked well for most of our anterior resections and all that, because we knew we had sufficient length and the vascularity was good. But the issues which were coming up was, when we did, very extensive mobilization of colon, or when we did intersphincteric resection and we had to anastomose. So this is one of the examples where, we did an intersphincteric resection. It was coloanal anastomosis. After 2 weeks, this is how it looked. So we had, but the tissue was viable, about 2 centimeter depth of tissue. So we had to re-anastomose. But this is when we started thinking, in these cases, what we used to do is, we used to deliver the specimen down, because the specimen comes out through the anus. We look at we give indocyanine green and look at the vascularity and anastomose based on that. So something which I thought, okay, we should relook at this. Is there something which we are doing wrong? So this is something which I realized, this is, few things which we must do before, as I see, though there is no evidence. In fact, this is only a, wherever you look, the only thing that they're talking about is, as it is only a qualitative assessment of blood supply, it is not a quantitative assessment. There is no clear-cut guidelines that can be generated on this, because my truth may be different from somebody else's truth here. So there is no literature to clearly support, but few things which I have learned to do, one second, is that, I transect the mesocolon to the level where I plan to transect the descending colon or sigmoid colon, whichever area which I am trying to transect. So I go and I completely transect the mesocolon, so that the vascularity across is totally avoided, because nowadays most of the times we are doing it laparoscopically only, or robotically for that matter. So once I have that area, then mesorectal resection also, mesorectal margin also is defined. We do the mesorectum, we give a good margin, we are transecting, we clear the transection, point of transection. Once that is done, so we are basically stopping all the blood supply, whatever can come from the other areas, to the line of anastomosis, so that there is no confusion. We transect the rectum using stapler, or if you are doing it coloanal from the anus. After that, we inject the dye now, because so that we have very clear that our line of anastomosis is not compromised. So once we have that, we look at the vascularity of the distal condu as well as the proximal condu. And what is important to look at, what I have found is, it's not the blotchiness of the bowel, which, or the mesentery, which has to be looked at. Blotchy green is not enough. We need to have, visible vessels over there. If you wait for a moment, you can clearly see the, vessels which are glowing up nicely. You need to wait at that area where you want to anastomose. Look at the vessels. Do they look filled up nicely? So that is important to look at, and that is how you can make sure that the bowel that you are anastomosing is healthy. This is another situation wherein very peculiar situations where we can end up in, where there is a large small bowel mesenteric mass which is sitting on the, oh sorry, this was another sorry, I missed it. Did I say small bowel here? Yeah. Okay, sorry. I think this is okay. I'll present this. So this is something Vail, which we performed sentinel node biopsy for a melanoma foot. This is a melanoma foot, a left foot melanoma. So we are given the indocyanine green. You can see the CSF mode, which is in which it is showing there's multicolor. You can see the lymphatics. So those, for people who don't know how the lymphatic flow occurs from the foot, it is along the saphenous vein. So anything in that region, the best way to, look at, you have to look for the sentinel nodes along the saphenous vein in order to identify and get a good sentinel node yield in melanoma foot. So once we are in that space, we can develop the space, we can, it is essential that you reach the area of saphenous vein. So mark it with, you already know, because, dye is there, where exactly the dye is passing, because these lymphatic networks are superficial. So transcutaneously, it's possible to assess. So we create the entire plane which is required, and now in the ICG mode, See, in this area, this is the saphenous vein area. So once we reach there, we look for any fluorescence. You can see in the overlay mode, you can clearly see a lymph node popping up over there. In other scenario, when it is not possible, when we don't give ICG, it is very difficult to make out in a fatty person where the lymph nodes are. So that's a lymph node. So lymph node is dissected out. And this also makes sure that your lymph node is resected completely. It is not part resection. We store it there. We look for more nodes. That is again a blotch because of the dye leak from the duct. Now we need to look for more nodes along the same line. This is saphenous vein, and we find a large node. In fact, this patient had undergone CT scan as well, but nodes for some reason were not picked up. I don't know whether it was bad reporting. We have seen the thing. We were also not suspecting, but these two of the nodes came out to be positive. These nodes were, to us, when we looked at endoscopically, it looked quite big, but it was approximately about a centimeter. I feel it should have been picked up preoperatively. So this is the this is saphenous vein at the end. So we are making sure nothing else is left around the saphenous vein. When these nodes came out, of course, they were positive. We had to convert the, we had to complete the procedure and take out all the nodes. So that is one. So reverse axillary mapping is something which we are in the process of learning, because this is something which we need to understand in more detail. Very little available in the form of literature. We, as usual, we give about an ml of dye in the arm, start the axillary dissection. As we do the axillary dissection, we look at the monitor as well to look at the any crossover lymphatics from the upper limb. I think the upper limb lymphatics are seen there. Again, this is a dye spillover for some reason which I can't explain, but this is a possible lymphatic which was passing in this region. So we spared that. Only time will tell us whether really what we have done is justified, because the problem with this is the lifetime risk is about 40% in patients who undergo axillary lymph node dissection for lymphedema, and 60% escape. So when 60% of the patients escape, you don't know whether really, you cannot really say whether what you have done is really justifiable or not. So I don't know which, 1 second. So this was the last, it was supposed to be shown much earlier. It's something which is simple thing. Vessel, there's a duodenum, you can see here. So something sitting right in the region of duodenum, it's a carcinoid tumor, and we were worried about the involvement of the superior mesenteric artery and vein. So as we went on, we kept the ICG handy, because the idea is not that we need to recognize the artery here, because it will be very difficult to do it, but we should not transect a major segment of the bowel. That was our whole intention. So we were constantly looking at any major vessels coming our way, and we found 2 vessels passing in this region. So what we are into the tumor, so it could have been a loop of the superior mesenteric artery or one of the major branches of it. So we took, or it may be partly going through the tumor. So we took that, we put vascular clamps on that, bulldog clamps on both the vessels. I had to make sure it is not just a loop of superior mesenteric artery going through the tumor. So we just wanted to know that the rest of the intestine lights up. small intestine. So we saw the rest of the small intestine was beautifully lighting up. Our tensions were solved. We could remove this tumor en masse. So somewhere where, we had to think that, okay, this is, the technology is really useful in a very simple way. It, is something which is very simple, very in scenarios where, it can save your life. Thank you very much. And, I need to thank Stryker for giving me this opportunity to present my experience. Dr. Karthik?
Thank you, sir. That was a very lucid presentation, and I think I learned a lot from your experience taking this forward. And just some final comments I'm expecting from both of you. First, sir, Dr. Subramanian Rao, sir, where do you see the future of fluorescence-guided surgery, and what are the new or the future avenues or prospects in oncology, in cancer? Sir, you're muted. Yeah.
The most important advance will be newer dyes.
Okay.
See now, if you have to image ureter, you'll have to enter into the ureter and inject something or place a stent which glows. So it's a very invasive procedure. This is something when the previous versions of Stryker had come into the market, I told them very clearly and went on mic to tell them that I will never do an bilateral ureteric intervention to identify ureter. If I cannot identify ureter, I don't deserve to be operating those patients. So it's that way. When you are dealing with resections in the retroperitoneum, you should be able to identify ureter. And if you have to stent both ureters, so if you go through literature, Karthik, 1% of ureters can be injured by stenting. Seriously injured, enough to produce problems. So if you cannot identify a ureter without an intervention within, if it's simple, the way we do for perfusion or for sentinel, it's a different issue. But you do a bilateral ureteric catheterization, there is a risk of septicemia, urinary septicemia, especially in women. So these are things, and most of the ureteric stentings are done in women only because pelvic pathology is much more common in women. So I think that is not the way to go. There is a dye called IVR 750E, something like that. A number may be wrong. So this dye is in phase 3 studies. So toxicity has been a little higher than ICG, but tolerable. So if this comes through, it is predominantly excreted by the kidney. So in about 10 minutes, it reaches the ureter. So inject this dye, both the ureters will be glowing. So once that happens, I think pelvic surgery will become safer and gynecologists can become much more bolder. They don't have to call surgical oncologists to identify ureters at least. So there are multiple other dyes that are on the bench. They'll take time to come to the bedside. And what is very interesting is the same systems, the same NIFR systems can actually read these dyes without any problem. So you don't have to buy another machine. So you only have to buy the dye, keep the same 1688 or 1588 and continue to work on your patients. So that is real good news.
Great.
And many other, see, lung imaging, lung fluorescence, for example, is just unbelievable. Navigation surgery is just unbelievable. But there is lots of work that needs to be done. It's a work in progress. And with the volumes of small lung lesions that we see, we won't be able to reach a stage wherein we can use fluorescence to do real segmentectomies and subsegmentectomies. So if the dyes improve, our job will become easy.
Great. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you for that insight. That's really news to me, and I think that really works out in future. Dr. Nayak, the same question to you. What do you see the future of fluorescence imaging in oncology?
I think, these are the main things which are coming up, the organ specific dyes which can be, specifically targeted in such a way that, it makes it very easy to identify a specific structure like a nerve, for example. In fact, neurosurgery, they have a lot more dyes. In fact, they have very good dyes which are there, fluorescent dyes. So similar dyes coming up for each organ, which can light up each part separately and make it easier for surgeon and bring down the learning curve and make it safer for everybody to operate is something which I think is the future of fluorescence. It is there, it is not. In fact, day in and day out, things are improving. See, when we look at, for example, cytoreductive surgery, for colonic or ovarian malignancies, the tagged, dyes, tagged indocyanine green. So these dyes are coming up, and these are in the experimental phase. But tomorrow, when you want to give a good complete cytoreduction, CC0 complete cytoreduction, it should be possible with the camera to look around and see that you have done it completely. So it makes it much easier. You don't need to feel, you don't need to really look at which is viable. You don't have to use too much of your thinking process whether this tissue is viable or not. So that makes a huge difference in the surgical outcomes, and these are the things which will come up as we go on.
Great. That's really exciting because please continue.
It's not just Lal Bagh that is going to be colorful. Your operation rooms also will be very colorful.
Yes, sir.
Not all going to be colors, multicolor now. It's not.
Yeah, now it is lighting up green. That's the only thing. But in future, it will be red, green, yellow. Everything will be there.
Yes. You choose your colors.
So earlier, Dr. Puntambekar was talking about some yellow dye for the nerves. And probably if we have one dye for the ureter, probably we'll have 3 or 4 colors for various structures.
Ureter is almost there. Karthik,
yes.
Ureter, it's almost there.
Okay.
It will take a year maybe.
Yeah, that will be nice too. Maybe in the next iSpice session, we'll be having a session on ureter with the new dye. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your excellent inputs to both of you. And I thank the iSpice organizing people for inviting me to this session. I learned a lot personally from this, and I think I'll take this experience forward in using this further. Thank you, sir. Thank you to both of you. Handing over to the management.
Thank you.
Thank you, Karthik. Nice to see you, Sandeep.
Thank you, sir. Same here.
See you
after a long time.
In person, yes. God bless you, all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Striker. Each one of you at Striker. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Enjoyed the session.
Thank you.
Heartfelt thank you